Karen thought spitting her chewing gum into a royal guard's eye was the perfect way to get a reaction. She even laughed and called it a bullseye, but when the captain gave one quiet command, everything changed. The guard's response not only silenced her mockery, but left her frozen mid-laugh with a sticky situation of her own. Here's what happened. Now, before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel because tomorrow at the same time, we'll bring you another story of courage and discipline from the Royal Guards that you won't want to miss. The July sun beat down mercilessly on Buckingham Palace, the heat shimmering off the ornate gates as tourists gathered in droves. Despite the sweltering temperature that had already reached 32 degrees by midday, Royal Guard Corporal Nathan Davies stood perfectly still at his post, his scarlet tunic and bearskin cap a stark contrast against the palace's cream-coloured facade. At 28, Corporal Davies was no ordinary guardsman. 2 tours in Afghanistan and a distinguished service record had earned him this prestigious position. Sweat trickled down his back beneath the heavy uniform, but his face remained impassive, eyes focused on a distant point as he had been trained to do. 8 years of military discipline had taught him to endure far worse than London's heatwave. The ceremonial rifle rested precisely against his shoulder, white-gloved hands positioned with textbook perfection. "This is absolutely ridiculous!" The shrill voice cut through the respectful murmurs of the crowd. "I've been standing in this heat for 20 minutes just to see some palace." Karen Wilcox emerged from the throng of tourists, fanning herself dramatically with a crumpled palace pamphlet. Her designer sunglasses, oversized and bearing a prominent logo, slid down her nose as she surveyed the scene with obvious disdain. At 45, Karen wore her entitlement like her expensive clothing, conspicuously and with an air that suggested everyone should appreciate it. Her blonde hair was arranged in a stylish bob that somehow remained perfect, despite the heat that had wilted everyone else's appearance. "Excuse me," she huffed, pushing past a young couple taking photos. "Some of us have places to be." She shouldered through the crowd with practiced determination, her voice rising with each step. "Can't believe I paid for this experience. It's highway robbery in this heat." Tourists parted before her, some with apologetic glances toward those around them, others with the weary recognition of a character they'd encountered before. Karen's path took her directly toward Corporal Davies's post, her trajectory as deliberate as it was concerning. "Why aren't there any fans out here? Or water stations?" she demanded of no one in particular, though her volume ensured everyone heard. "Basic customer service, people." Her designer purse swung from her arm as she gestured broadly, nearly striking a child who quickly stepped back. The crowd nearest to Corporal Davies began to shift uncomfortably, sensing the approaching disruption. Several parents moved their children back, recognizing the brewing storm. Karen's eyes locked onto the motionless guard, her mouth curling into a smile that held no warmth, only the anticipation of someone who had found a target for their frustration. "Well, look at this," Karen announced loudly, gesturing toward Corporal Davies with a manicured hand. "Our tax money hard at work paying for living mannequins. Is this really what Britain's military budget goes toward?" She circled the guard, examining him as one might inspect merchandise in a shop. The crowd's chatter dimmed, conversations dying as attention shifted to the unfolding scene. Several tourists lowered their cameras, suddenly uncomfortable with documenting what was happening. "That hat must be absolutely cooking your brain," Karen continued, pointing at the bearskin cap. "Is that real fur? Someone should call Peter, though I suppose animal rights don't matter when you're playing dress-up soldier." A middle-aged couple exchanged glances and stepped away, the husband shaking his head in disapproval. Karen either didn't notice or didn't care, her voice growing louder as she warmed to her audience. "Are you actually a robot or just brain dead from standing in the sun all day?" She waved her hand inches from the guard's face. "Hello? Anyone in there? Blink once if your brain still functions." Corporal Davies remained perfectly still, his training evident in every line of his posture. Not a muscle twitched despite the blatant provocation. The sun glinted off the brass buttons of his tunic, each one polished to mirror shine, a testament to the pride he took in his duty that Karen couldn't begin to comprehend. "I've seen mannequins at Harrods with more personality," she scoffed, pulling out her phone to take a selfie with the guard in the background. "Smile! Oh, wait, you can't. They probably selected you for your ability to impersonate a statue. Was that the only military skill you possessed?" From the edge of the crowd, an elderly man with a military bearing watched with narrowed eyes. His posture straightened as Karen continued her tirade, the medals pinned to his jacket, hinting at his own service. Colonel James Harrison, retired, had seen this type of behavior before, his weathered face registering both disgust and concern. "I wonder if they're failed soldiers who couldn't handle real military duties," Karen speculated loudly to nearby tourists, who increasingly tried to distance themselves from her. "I mean, what kind of elite force just stands there getting mocked? My personal trainer shows more discipline, and he's not even government-funded." She moved closer, deliberately invading the guard's personal space. "This is the famous British military tradition? Standing still and looking constipated? Impressive skill set." Her voice dripped with sarcasm as she posed for another photo, this time pretending to touch the guard's hat. "Do they select you based on your ability to hold your bladder, or is it your talent for ignoring basic social cues?" Karen laughed at her own joke, glancing around for appreciation that didn't come. The crowd had grown quiet, many spectators shifting uncomfortably or moving away entirely. Colonel Harrison took a single step forward, his hands clasped behind his back, as he observed the situation with increasing concern. His eyes met those of a young family who were hurrying their children away from the spectacle, a silent understanding passing between them about the disrespect they were witnessing. Karen, emboldened by the guard's continued silence, moved even closer. "I wonder what they pay you to just stand here. Whatever it is, it's too much for this performance art. My yoga instructor holds poses longer than you, and he actually has skills worth paying for." She pulled out a pack of chewing gum from her designer purse, unwrapping a piece with deliberate slowness. The crinkle of the wrapper seemed unusually loud in the tense atmosphere. She popped the gum into her mouth and began chewing loudly, smacking her lips with each exaggerated motion. "This whole tradition is like an outdated museum exhibit," Karen declared, gesturing broadly at the palace grounds. "I mean, it's the digital age, and Britain's still putting men in funny hats to stand around like it's 1850. What's next? Bringing back horse-drawn carriages and plague doctors?" A young mother hurriedly ushered her two wide-eyed children away from the scene, murmuring, "That's not how we behave," as they retreated. Karen tracked their movement with a dismissive glance before returning her attention to Corporal Davies. "Even my dog responds when I talk to him," she said, smacking her gum between words. "Are you trained not to think either, or is that just a bonus trait they look for when recruiting for this position?" The crowd had noticeably thinned around her now, creating a bubble of space that emphasized her isolation. Those who remained watched with a mixture of discomfort and morbid fascination, unable to look away from the unfolding spectacle. "I suppose it's fitting," Karen continued, circling the guard again. "Britain's empire is gone, its global relevance fading, so all that's left is theatrical performances for tourists. At least Disney characters interact with the guests." Colonel Harrison's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face working as he restrained himself from intervention. His eyes never left Karen, noting her increasingly aggressive body language with the assessment of someone who understood escalating situations. Karen's chewing grew more aggressive, almost violent in its intensity. "Can you even see through all that ceremonial nonsense? Or does the hat restrict blood flow to your brain?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a mock whisper, though still loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. "Blink twice if you need medical assistance, though I suppose that would require independent thought." A teenage boy had begun filming the incident on his phone, only to have his mother firmly push his arm down, shaking her head in silent reprimand. The action wasn't lost on Karen, who turned her attention to them briefly. "Oh, don't stop him! Document this waste of taxpayer money. Maybe it'll go viral and they'll finally modernize this absurd tradition." Her voice had taken on a sharper edge, frustration building at her inability to provoke a reaction. She returned to Corporal Davies, studying his face with exaggerated scrutiny. "They must have a type for this job. Completely blank expression, dead eyes, zero personality. Were you born this way? Or did the military train all the humanity out of you?" The sun had shifted, casting Karen's shadow across the guard's polished boots. She noticed and deliberately moved to block more sunlight from hitting his face. "Is this better? Or does it not matter since you're essentially a piece of furniture with a pulse?" Colonel Harrison had moved closer now, his military training evident in his measured approach. Several other observers seemed to be considering intervention, uncomfortable glances exchanged among strangers, suddenly united in their disapproval of Karen's behavior. "I bet if I offered you enough money, you'd break character," Karen said, smacking her gum loudly between each word. "Everyone has a price. What's yours? Is it worth more than your precious duty?" The afternoon heat seemed to intensify as Karen's frustration visibly mounted. Her attempts to provoke a reaction had failed, each taunt meeting the same impassive discipline that had withstood far worse on actual battlefields. The gum in her mouth was worked with increasing aggression, her jaw movements becoming almost violent. "You know what?" Karen's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. "I think it's time we found out if there's actually a human being under all that pomp and circumstance." She positioned herself directly in front of Corporal Davies, her eyes level with his chest. The guard's gaze remained fixed forward, looking through her as if she were merely air. This, more than anything, seemed to infuriate Karen. "I've dealt with customer service reps who at least acknowledge my existence," she said, voice rising. "What makes you so special that you can't even blink when someone's talking to you?" Colonel Harrison had moved to the edge of the small clearing that had formed around Karen and the guard, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, his posture reflecting years of military bearing. Several tourists nearby seemed to recognize his authority, glancing between him and the unfolding scene with questioning looks. Karen took a deep breath, her decision visible in the hardening of her expression. With deliberate movements, she worked the gum to the front of her mouth, gathering it between her teeth and tongue. "Let's see if this gets your attention," she muttered, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. The moment stretched like elastic, ready to snap. Several onlookers seemed to realize what was about to happen, mouths opening in protest that came too late. With a sharp, practiced motion, Karen spat the wad of gum directly at Corporal Davies' face. The pink glob hit its mark with unexpected accuracy, landing directly in the guard's right eye. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd. Someone uttered a shocked, "Oh my God," while others simply stared in horrified disbelief. The moment hung suspended as everyone waited for the guard's reaction. Despite the direct assault, Corporal Davies maintained his position, though a slight tightening around his jaw betrayed the immense discipline required to do so. "Bullseye!" Karen crowed, her laugh cutting through the stunned silence. "Right there in his socket!" She turned to the crowd, arms spread wide as if accepting applause. "Did you see that? Perfect shot!" The pink gum clung to the guard's eyelid, visibly uncomfortable and potentially harmful, yet Corporal Davies stood unflinching. The physical assault had crossed a line that even the most passive observers recognized, shifting the atmosphere from uncomfortable to outright hostile toward Karen. "What's wrong, soldier boy?" Karen taunted, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "Can't break character even when assaulted, or are you actually as brainless as I thought?" Colonel Harrison had taken 2 decisive steps forward, his intention to intervene clear, when movement near the palace gate caught his attention. A senior officer, in the distinctive uniform of the Royal Guards, was approaching with purposeful strides. "Looks like I've finally gotten someone's attention," Karen said, noticing the approaching officer. Her smile widened with anticipation. "Maybe now I'll get an explanation for why the British military trains its men to be furniture." The crowd parted silently for the approaching officer, whose insignia marked him as a captain. His face was composed but stern, eyes taking in the situation with one comprehensive sweep. The gum in the guard's eye, the smirking woman, the disturbed crowd, the story told itself. "What's wrong with him?" Karen demanded of the approaching officer, gesturing toward Corporal Davies. "I pay taxes for actual security, not decorative statues who can't even defend themselves from chewing gum." Captain Henry Ashbourne moved with the measured precision that marked his 15 years of military service. His approach was neither hurried nor hesitant, but carried the absolute certainty of command. The crowd instinctively gave him space, recognizing authority in his bearing, even before noting his rank insignia. "Finally, someone who might actually speak," Karen said, her voice carrying an unearned confidence. She gestured toward Corporal Davies, whose eye was visibly irritated by the gum still clinging to it. "Your toy soldier here needs some basic training in public relations." Captain Ashbourne stopped precisely 2 feet from Karen, his gaze briefly assessing her before moving to Corporal Davies. His experienced eyes noted the guard's perfect maintenance of protocol despite the assault, the slight redness beginning to form around the affected eye, and the remarkable discipline being displayed. "Is there a problem here, madam?" Captain Ashbourne asked, his voice neutral yet carrying the unmistakable timbre of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Karen's stance shifted, her body language suggesting she had found an ally. "Yes, there absolutely is. I've been trying to get some basic human reaction from this." She waved dismissively at Davies. "Display piece. I mean, what's the point of having guards who don't actually guard anything?" Captain Ashbourne's expression remained unreadable as he studied her, taking in the designer clothes, the entitled posture, the complete lack of remorse for assaulting one of his men. "I see," he said simply, though his tone carried subtle layers that Karen entirely missed. "Well," she pressed, gesturing expansively, "aren't you going to do something about it? Train your men better? Explain why my tax pounds are funding this ridiculous tradition?" Instead of answering, Captain Ashbourne turned slightly toward Corporal Davies and moved closer to him. The crowd watched in tense silence as he leaned in and spoke in a low voice that only the guard could hear. "Situation assessed, Corporal. Permission granted to address." The words were brief, nearly inaudible to onlookers, but their effect was immediate. Something shifted in Corporal Davies's bearing, not a relaxation of discipline, but a subtle transition from ceremonial duty to a more direct form of military presence. Karen watched this exchange with growing satisfaction, assuming the captain was reprimanding the guard. Her smile widened, arms crossing over her chest in triumphant expectation. "About time someone in charge showed up," she announced to the crowd. "Now we'll see some action." Captain Ashbourne stepped back, his posture formal as he announced clearly for all to hear. "Corporal Davies, permission granted to address the situation." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning registered on Karen's face. Her smile faltered, confidence wavering as uncertainty crept in. This wasn't the script she had anticipated. "Wait, what are you—" she began, but stopped short as Corporal Davies moved for the first time. The movement was not the jerky action of someone breaking under pressure, but the fluid, controlled motion of a highly trained soldier transitioning from one form of duty to another. In one smooth sequence, Corporal Davies stepped forward, rendering a perfect salute to his captain. "Sir, thank you, sir." His voice rang clear and steady, completing the formal acknowledgement before turning his attention to Karen. Karen's expression transformed rapidly from smug satisfaction to dawning comprehension that the situation was not proceeding as she had anticipated. The captain wasn't here to admonish the guard or apologize to her. He had come to authorize a response. "But I assumed you would—" Karen stumbled over her words, taking an instinctive step backward as her perceived alliance with authority crumbled. "You assumed incorrectly, madam," Captain Ashbourne said, his voice carrying just enough edge to cut through her protests. "In Her Majesty's Royal Guard, we address assaults on our personnel with appropriate measures." The word assault rippled through the crowd, crystallizing what had occurred. Several onlookers nodded in grim agreement, while others looked away in second-hand embarrassment for Karen, whose face had begun to pale beneath her makeup. "Assault? It was just a bit of gum. A joke," Karen protested, her voice rising an octave. "Everyone needs to lighten up. These guards are just tourist attractions anyway." Captain Ashbourne's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Corporal Davies served 2 tours in Afghanistan before earning his position here. The Royal Guards are active duty soldiers, madam, not tourist attractions, and you have just physically assaulted one of them. Karen's gaze darted between the captain and Corporal Davies, who now stood at formal attention rather than ceremonial guard position. The subtle difference transformed him from statue to soldier before her eyes, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed her face. Corporal Davies faced Karen directly, his gaze unwavering as he reached up with white-gloved fingers to remove the gum from his eye. The movement was precise and controlled, betraying none of the discomfort he must have felt. He examined the pink wad between his thumb and forefinger with clinical detachment, his eye already reddening from the contact. "Madam," he began, his voice surprisingly soft but carrying across the now silent crowd, "in my 8 years of military service, I've endured sandstorms in Helmand Province, enemy fire in combat zones, and 48-hour watches in hostile territory." He paused, rolling the gum between his fingers. "But I must admit, this is the first time someone has deliberately assaulted me while I was standing guard over centuries of British tradition." Karen began to back away slightly, her earlier bravado diminishing as she realized the direction this encounter was taking. "It was just a joke," she repeated, her voice less certain. "Everyone's overreacting." "A joke," Corporal Davies echoed, examining the gum with the same attention to detail he applied to every aspect of his duty. "Interesting that you find assault amusing." His composure was absolute, his dignity intact despite the pink gum between his fingers. The contrast between his bearing and Karen's increasingly defensive posture was striking to everyone watching. "This uniform," Davies continued, "represents more than just tradition. It stands for discipline, sacrifice, and service to country. Values that extend far beyond these palace grounds to battlefields where my brothers and sisters in arms have given their lives." He held the gum up slightly, the sunlight catching it as he rolled it between his fingers. "When you disrespect this uniform, you disrespect every soldier who has ever worn it in service and sacrifice. When you assume we stand here as decorations, you fundamentally misunderstand what we represent." Karen's face had flushed deep red, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. The crowd had grown, drawn by the unusual break in ceremony. "I didn't mean—" she began, but Davies continued as if she hadn't spoken. "You know, in Afghanistan, we learned to return fire with precision and purpose." His voice remained measured, but carried a new edge that commanded attention. Always proportional, always controlled. In one fluid motion, almost too quick to follow, Corporal Davies flicked his wrist. The gum sailed through the air in a perfect arc before landing with unerring accuracy in Karen's carefully styled hair, adhering immediately to the blonde strands. "Bullseye," he said simply, echoing her earlier taunt. Karen's expression froze mid-retort, her hand rising slowly to her hair as comprehension dawned. Her fingers encountered the sticky mass, now firmly entangled in her expensive hairdo. The crowd's collective intake of breath was followed by a ripple of barely suppressed laughter. What did you How dare! You can't, Karen spluttered, her fingers frantically working to remove the gum, succeeding only in spreading it further through her hair. I believe that constitutes a proportional response, Corporal Davies stated calmly. You may find that peanut butter works well for removal, though in this heat I wouldn't recommend it. Karen's composure shattered completely as she realized the gum was becoming more entangled with each desperate attempt to remove it. "This is assault," she shrieked, ignoring the irony of her accusation. "My hair costs more than your monthly salary." "Fascinating priority assessment," Davies replied, his voice still level. "In my experience, respect costs nothing, yet proves invaluable in most situations." He straightened his uniform with a subtle adjustment. "Something to consider while you're working on your hairstyle." Karen's fingers were now hopelessly stuck in her hair, the gum spreading into an increasingly tangled mess. Her face contorted between rage and panic as she realized the extent of the predicament. "Someone help me! This is outrageous!" 2 security officers had appeared at the edge of the gathering, summoned by the disturbance. They approached with professional caution, taking in the unusual scene. "This is assault! I'll sue the entire Royal Guard!" she shrieked, her face flushing deeper as strands of hair came away with her tugging fingers, stuck to the expanding web of gum. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The security officers approached with professional restraint, though one had to clear his throat suspiciously to mask what might have been a chuckle. "Ma'am, we need you to calm down," the taller officer said, reaching for her elbow. "Don't touch me!" Karen jerked away, nearly losing her balance. "That man attacked me. He put gum in my hair." Her gestures toward Corporal Davies grew increasingly frantic, drawing more attention from passing tourists who stopped to observe the spectacle. "According to multiple witnesses, ma'am, you initiated the encounter by spitting gum at the Royal Guard," the officer replied, his tone measured but firm. "We'll need to document the incident." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "Document? Are you joking? Look at my hair!" She pointed at the growing disaster atop her head, where the gum had now spread to encompass a significant portion of her once perfect bob. "This will cost thousands to fix." Captain Ashbourne stepped forward, his bearing commanding immediate attention. "Officers, please escort this individual from the premises. I believe we have sufficient grounds for charges of assault against military personnel, though that decision will rest with your superiors." "Charges?" Karen's voice cracked on the word. "You can't be serious. It was just gum. He's fine." "Assault on a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces is a serious offence, regardless of the method employed," Captain Ashbourne stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The courts take a particularly dim view of such behaviour towards ceremonial guards, who are under orders not to react." As the security officers moved to position themselves on either side of Karen, Corporal Davies spoke once more. "Perhaps the officers can help you with your hair. They're quite skilled at handling sticky situations." The perfectly delivered line, spoken with the same military precision as any formal address, sent a whole wave of suppressed laughter through the crowd. Even Captain Ashbourne's lips twitched momentarily before he regained his stern expression. "That's enough, Corporal," Captain Ashbourne commanded, his voice sharp, but not without a hint of understanding. "Resume protocol." "Sir?" "Yes, sir," Davies responded immediately, snapping back to attention with a precise salute. The transformation was remarkable to witness. One moment he had been addressing Karen with controlled composure. The next, he was once again the perfect ceremonial guard, his face impassive, his posture immaculate. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, returning him to his role as living symbol of military tradition. Karen continued to protest as the officers led her away, her complaints fading into the distance as she disappeared from view. Several onlookers pulled out phones to capture her departure, but most simply watched with a mixture of satisfaction and lingering shock at what they had witnessed. Within minutes, the normal rhythm of the tourist area had resumed. Corporal Davies stood at his post, showing no sign of the incident, except for a slight redness around his right eye. Visitors moved past with a new respectfulness. many nodding acknowledgement, or maintaining a more appropriate distance than before. Captain Ashbourne remained for a moment longer, conducting a brief inspection of Davies's appearance before offering a nearly imperceptible nod of approval. Then he too departed, his duty complete, leaving Corporal Davies to continue his watch as he had before, with dignity, discipline, and unwavering dedication to duty. Now was the guard's response of returning the gum a justified, proportional response, or should he have handled it differently? And how would you react if you witnessed someone deliberately disrespecting a royal guard like Karen did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to press the notification bell to catch all our new uploads. Share this video with friends who appreciate stories of dignity and respect. Check out our previous videos appearing on your screen right now. We'll be back tomorrow with another powerful story at the same time. Remember, sometimes the most impressive strength is shown through discipline rather than reaction.